Hey, everybody. This is John from the KrakCast here. And today we've got an interview with another John, John Deverall of New Zealand. Now, he visited Krakow in March of this year, and one evening during his stay, he found himself, as tourists often do, in one of Krakow's many adult entertainment nightclubs, this one on ulica Mikołajska. Now, unfortunately for John, what happened that night has turned into a very difficult personal ordeal for him and a very interesting legal case that will test what the government is able and willing to do about a problem that has been reported many times in the past. Now, I noticed some of the coverage about John's story in the Polish press, and I reached out to him to ask if he would be willing to talk to us, and he graciously, and I think bravely accepted. Now, I say bravely because the nature of what happened to him would be enough to keep some people quiet, maybe most people quiet, which is something that those who victimized him probably count on. But John is going in the opposite direction. He's embracing media interviews to draw attention to what happened to him and to help others in his situation. So I have a lot of respect for that, and I hope everyone listening will too. Now, through the magic of the internet, John is able to join me all the way from New Zealand to talk about everything. John Deverall, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Now, John, let's start by going back to that day in March. Why don't you walk us through what happened?
So I traveled to Krakow. I didn't actually know anything about Krakow when I arrived. I'd been living in Germany for a few years, and I knew that there was a concentration camp close by. So I went there for the historical sites. And then on my first night there, I got to a fantastic hostel, which was a great place to stay. They give you a beer when you walk in the door. And then I left and I walked down the street, and shortly, within a couple of minutes, I was approached by a woman on the street. And she said, you should, follow me, I'll take you to a great place. And she seemed friendly, and I went along with her. And so I entered this bar. It was called the VIP Club. And the first thing that happens is you're given a couple of cherry-flavoured shots. And you sit down at the bar, and it's a strip club. There are a woman stripping. That becomes obvious very quickly. And you sit, and then people join you. So a woman joined me, and we had an interesting conversation, and talking, and it was a pleasant experience at that time. And then there was an invitation to buy a drink, and I felt bad not buying a drink, and I felt pressured. So I did eventually buy a drink, and they're pretty expensive drinks. I think they're 130 zloty roughly. It seemed like some kind of cocktail. And in New Zealand, that's actually not that expensive for one of these drinks. It's pretty much what you expect to pay. So it didn't come across as expensive, and I just arrived there. And we talked more. And later I was invited back to dance. She said, do you want to come back and dance? I said, okay, well. And eventually there was a pressure to do this. And eventually I said yes. It was cheaper than the drink, apparently, to go back and dance. And then every time, when I got back there, I had some cash. I wanted to pay cash. So we don't accept cash back here. We just don't take cash. And I said, seems odd that you don't accept Polish currency in Poland. And they laughed a bit and said, it's just a little bit strange. It's just a policy. We only accept card. And so I said, okay, we'll use my card. And then every time I used my card, it had been, they said the machine's not working. We'll come back with a different machine. We'll try a different machine. There were 8 transactions that went through my card. I got a bit suspicious after the first couple, and I asked to see a docket because I wasn't given the dockets. And it did say declined on the docket. So I thought, okay, these people aren't trying to rip me off it. The docket they've just shown me does say declined or not accepted, or it was translated declined in Google Translate. And I left. And then the the next morning when I checked my account, there were 8 transactions that had been through my card, totaling about 18,000 zlotys.
8 transactions, 18,000 zlotys.
Yeah, 18,500 zloty.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to spend on a night out. It's not the kind of thing I typically do.
So at 130 zlotys a drink, how do they get to 18,000 zlotys?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a really good question. I have no idea what these charges could have been for. But from what I've read online is that the defence of these clubs typically seems to be that they'll say, oh, well, the price list was, it was 5,000 zlotys for this and 5,000 zlotys for that. And, of course, you never see the price list up front. They're never going to show you this. They're con artists. But that's the defence. And they say, well, you should have known the prices.
So let's go back to the club. When you were there, or maybe as you were leaving, did you have any feeling that your credit card had been abused or misused in any way? And how did you feel kind of physically when you left?
Well, I was feeling very sick, actually, when I left. I hadn't drunk very much. I'd only drunk a couple of drinks. But I felt very sick to the point where I threw up on the pavement, which is also very uncharacteristic. That's not something that I do normally. And so I haven't been able to figure out why I felt so sick. But there was another club that was raided, it's owned by the same people, I think, that was raided in Gdansk, and the police found GHB in the drinks there, which is a date rape drug. And there is some suspicion that there is some suspicion that the club puts some kind of drug in the drinks. We've got no proof of this. But when I've asked people who've signed up to the website that I created, do you think you were drugged at the club? More than 3/4 of people say yes. It's about more than 80% at the moment.
And what about you? Do you think you were drugged in the club?
I don't know if I was drugged. I think that I was intentionally given either very strong alcohol that I wasn't aware of. I just simply wasn't aware of the strength of what I was being given, or there was certainly some drugs in there.
Let's go back to the credit card companies for a second here. I've got a question, maybe a naive question, but I mean, don't they need some kind of verification, some kind of proof that you approve these purchases? When you make a big purchase, you need to enter a PIN number, or there's a signature involved. How do they okay a transaction for 18,000 zlotys without your approval?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. The short answer is I don't really know, and nobody really seems to know. The victims of this club, they do enter their PIN number, and I don't know whether they just cover up the numbers or sleight of hand, and the doc that I was shown when I wanted to use Google Translate to verify what was happening was maybe a fake one. I'm not quite sure how this happens.
Now, just to be clear, you say you had just a couple of drinks, right? 2 or 3 at the most, yeah?
That would be it. 2-3 drinks.
So the next morning, you wake up feeling horrible, I assume. And did you think about your credit card straight away, or is this something that you thought about maybe later, or how did that work out?
I only stumbled upon it later when I went to use my card, and it was declined. And it was because all of the money in that account had been cleaned out entirely. Every last dollar. So if there was $20,000 New Zealand currency, but if there was 50,000 zloty there, they would have just kept going. And that's the common theme. Okay,
just to clarify here, are we talking about 18,000 zlotys or 20,000 Kiwi dollars?
The club for me took 7,400 Kiwi dollars, which equates to about 18,500 zloty. But if there was more money in that account, they would have taken more.
I see. So at this point, I mean, were you able to put 2 and 2 together and realize that the club was the source of this problem? Or were you still not sure why your card was declined?
Yeah.
Or what was going on at this point?
I called the bank, and they described to me that there'd been some unusual transactions on the account. And then I had a look on the internet, checked my banking, and I could see the transactions that were there. And from that point in time onwards, I knew I'd been scammed. So I went straight to the police, found a lawyer, started figuring out what I was going to do about it.
And what was your first contact with the authorities here like?
It was
with the police.
Yeah, it was
right?
with the police. They appeared to take it seriously. They did make time and arrange an English translator at another police station. When I got to that police station, I had heard just from reading online that sometimes it gets a bit tricky to file a statement because people are busy and they don't have the time and they're just not really that interested. And that was my experience initially. And I don't think that they would have seen me if I did not have an advocate or lawyer with me. He went and argued with a couple of people. Pretty much, that's what happened.
Did you get the feeling that they had heard the same story a few times before?
Yes, absolutely. They have this story every single day. I know they have this. Yep.
So they weren't impressed. This was nothing new for them, was
absolutely
it?
Nothing new. Absolutely nothing new for them at all. They know full well that this is going on and have known for years.
So are you satisfied that the police kind of followed procedure and did everything they were supposed to do? Or do you think they were maybe less than enthusiastic about their investigation of this? Or what was your impression of that?
They did a very complete job of taking a statement. And that was, whether that was because I had a lawyer present who was making sure that everything was done completely, I'm not sure. But I can say from other people's experiences where they have tried to make a statement, they have had difficulty, some level of difficulty. And I can't say whether that difficulty is because of them and their approach to the situation or whether it's the police. But I have heard that others have had difficulty making statements.
Let's go back to the credit card companies just one more time here, because, I mean, it seems to me that, you know, when there are dodgy or suspicious charges on a credit card account, they have ways to block it, to withhold it, to charge it back to the retailer. And it seems to me, again, the circumstances that we're talking about now are pretty obvious. Why can't the credit card company kind of step in and kind of solve everybody's problem by not paying the charge?
Well, I think it's to do with a change from the way that cards used to work, where you'd sign a docket. And of course, that would have been good in my case because I'm never going to sign a docket for that much money. To these chip and pin style cards where the card has a chip in it, little computer chip, and you enter your PIN number, and that's considered your authorization. And the banks do not secure those transactions. They just say, well, you know, you entered your PIN, you agreed to it, money's gone. That's it. End of story. So that's the majority for most victims. Easily more than 85% of victims never get a cent back if they're using these chip and PIN cards. There are some banks in some European countries that have started to reimburse them those transactions. But that I've not seen any evidence of that yet in my country. I'll be testing that as well to see how that procedure goes. My bank is investigating at the moment. They've got to the point where, because they haven't received the original dockets, and they say it's impossible to investigate further without the original dockets. So I will get the original dockets to the bank because they've only recently requested those. But it's my impression of the bank is that they make it very difficult to claim back those funds.
I'm curious about the role of maybe the New Zealand authorities, the embassy here, somebody there. I don't know. Can they help, or are you basically on your own in this?
I think I'm probably on my own. Poland is outside the jurisdiction of the New Zealand police. Absolutely. I think most New Zealand police have probably not been to Poland, so there's not much they can do there. The advertising that the banks do here talks about the security of these cards and how if you lose money, they will reimburse it. And there are no terms and conditions put in these adverts. They don't have a little asterisk saying, unless you put your PIN number in. They don't have that. So to me, that just on the face of it, that looks like an advertising issue. And you seem to believe the same thing, and I did too prior. I thought, well, if I'm getting scammed here, the bank can reverse the charges. I had no idea. It just simply wasn't the case. And I think that's a common misperception. And the banks make sure that people have that misperception through their advertising, whether it's intentional or not.
Now, you're also pursuing other legal options apart from your contact with the police. Tell us about that as well.
Yeah, well, there is intent to file a case in Krakow. We're looking for victims. So if there are any victims that come forward, if they find the Polish clubscams.org website, it's very sad that they've been scammed, but it's always great for our case, because the more people that come forward and say, well, this also happened to me in exactly the same way, the better. That strengthens out. So
there are others in the same situation?
Yeah, there are. There's people coming forward every few days.
So are most of the people that you're dealing with foreign tourists, or are there Polish people as well, or what?
Almost everybody is a foreigner. Almost everybody. I think everybody is a foreigner. I do have some people on the list that have Polish contact details, and I don't know who they are actually. When people contact me, I need to phone them up and verify that they are who they say they are as best I can, because otherwise the club could sign up and get updates on our case, which would be bad. So the vast majority of people are definitely foreigners, but there's at least one person on the list that has Polish contact details. Whether they're Polish, I haven't determined that yet.
John, I mentioned earlier that the first time I read anything about your story was in the Polish press, and I was reading the reader comments that people can leave, and the clear majority of them were sympathetic to you and to your problem, and people were angry about the authorities and their failure to do anything about this kind of problem. But at the same time, there was a minority, maybe 20%, of the comments were basically some variation on the idea that if you go into a strip club, you kind of lose your right to complain about what happens, right? It's this kind of, it's your risk. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, I would say that, what they're doing is a crime. It's punishable with jail time between 6 months and 8 years in Poland. I would also say that the people who visit this club, they don't necessarily know what they're walking into. They're people that are interested in history. They're people that are interested in culture. They certainly haven't come to Krakow for the clubs, because if they'd Googled online, they'd know to stay well away. This is not a place that you go to these clubs. This is a place where you go to see history and culture. So this is what people are doing, and then they walk down the main square in town, and the main Florianska Street, and women come up to people. They might approach. By the time you've walked down Florianska, you might be approached up to 8 times by various people who are carrying out marketing for this club. And you don't necessarily know what you're going to see, especially now that this marketing is illegal, and they're doing it very discreetly as to not be caught by the authorities. So it's really a trick that's being played on tourists. And tourists are they're also coming from countries where this just doesn't happen. So there was a Japanese man who was found drunk, lying on the pavement with receipts for tens of thousands of dollars falling out of his pockets. Japan is a country with a very low level of corruption and crime. People just don't expect this.
Right. I mean, my own take on this is that I find those comments a little bit harsh in the sense that, this is a legal, legitimate business. No matter what you might think of it, it's not for everybody, but this is a legitimate business. Adults can go in there, and I think they should be able to go without the fear that they're going to be drugged and have their bank account cleaned out. I mean, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, I completely support that as well. It is a legitimate legal business that these companies are meant to be performing, but clearly they're breaking the law in the way that they do it.
John, give us an idea of the personal toll this ordeal has taken on you.
I think I'm a little bit fortunate, I think, because it's annoying to lose that money, but it's not devastating. And it actually led to some really great opportunities. I've met some great people at Krakow through this experience, because as I've got involved in trying to tackle these clubs, I've gotten to know people at local media outlets and met friends, and I stayed a lot longer in Krakow than a normal tourist would. So I've got great friends in Krakow now that I'll return to and visit as a result of this. And for me, I'm just looking at the positives, because if this had never happened to me, I wouldn't have this. So it's probably a very unusual answer.
John, it's great to see that you're kind of focused on the silver lining. I'm glad there is a silver lining.
Yeah, well, it's such a beautiful city, and I love it there. But I can talk about the toll that it's had more on some others. There is an area on the website where people can fill out a form to join. And there's a little space at the bottom. The last question in the questionnaire is there anything else you would like to tell us about your experience? And, one person wrote, yeah, after I lost the money, my wife left me. I don't see my kids anymore. I fell into depression. Just horrific stuff. I get these twice a week, these forms, and that's what keeps me going, wanting to shut this place down, because I just think, this has to stop.
John, tell us about the website and how people can get in touch with you.
It's polishclubscams.org is the English version, and polishclubscams.pl is the Polish translation.
John, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us today. We wish you the best of luck, and we look forward to having you back sometime when you could tell us all about the satisfactory resolution you can get in your case.
Thank you, John.
John Deverall, everybody, all the way from New Zealand. Thanks for joining us on the KrakCast. We'll see you next time.